Okay, here's a lesson on helping you work out certain problems in Delta Math Homework 4-2. And I'm going to do a problem from each one of these sections, or maybe two. Um, if you would like to follow along with your own problem, click on the first section, write the trig function with given features. So here's a sample problem of what you will be looking at. And notice that they're giving us certain elements of what our equation is going to contain. They're telling us it's a cosine function. They're telling us the midline is 4, amplitude is 3, and the period is 4 pi over 5. So one thing I need you to recall is the equations that I gave you guys are going to be a format of y equals, or f of x equals, let me start off with f of x because I think this first section uses f of x. F of x equals a times the cosine of bx minus c plus d, or if it's sine, notice it's the same format. The only difference is obviously the trig function is going to change. Now, one thing I told students is that we will not have any phase shift, horizontal shift. So as far as the C value is concerned, we are going to ignore that completely. So the only thing I need you to find in this first section is A, B, and D. Okay? Now, what do those mean? Well, we need to remember that A stands for the word amplitude. We have the B is the frequency, and D is your midline equation, or your midline value, okay? So let us find and set up the problem. So again, we are going to look for those three values. Two of them are given to us, amplitude and midline, and frequency. You're going to notice you are going to do some algebra and you are going to evaluate to be able to substitute with that answer. Okay, so let's go back over here. So we come back over here and we start typing. The first value we needed was your A. Your A value here is a 3. So I'm going to type a 3. Then we know it's a cosine. So cosine. And we're going to open parentheses. And we know that there's going to be a space there for B. And then we're going to have an X value right after it. Okay. And I'm going to come back and insert the value of B in that problem. And then, so it's A cosine BX plus the D value. Our D value is a positive 4, so I'm going to put plus 4. Obviously, if our midline value was negative 8, you put minus 8. So I need to go back here in front of the X, and I need to find what the coefficient of X is, and that is my B value. And I'm going to use the period that was given to me right here, period 4 pi over 5. So this right here. And I'm going to go here and write down the formula for period. Okay, the formula for period is 2 pi over B. They gave us the value of our period. Okay, so they gave us this value right here. So I'm going to substitute period with the value that they gave me. And was it 4 pi over 5 or just 4 5? Yeah, it was 4 pi over 5. So 4 pi divided by 5 is equal to 2 pi divided by B. Okay, so all I did was substitute what was given to me. Okay, now you are going to cross multiply to set up your equation. And once it's set up, you will solve for your B. So let's cross multiply. I'm going to cross multiply with the b value. So 4 pi times b is going to give me 4 pi b. Then I'm going to put an equal sign, and then I'm going to multiply in the other direction. Let's use a different color here. Let's use blue, and I'm going to multiply in a different direction. 5 times 2 pi, and I'm going to write 10 pi. Okay, and notice I write them side by side, and I have an equal sign in between them. I need to solve for b. This is b, and it needs to be isolated. And therefore, if I need to isolate b, I need to get rid of 4 pi. So I'm going to divide by 4 pi on both sides. So whatever's next to the b, I'm going to divide by it. And notice then, my b will be all alone now. 10 over 4 reduces to 5 over 2, because they're both even numbers that have factors of 2. And notice, though, that the pi's are going to cancel. Okay? All right. So b equals 5 halves. So I come back over here, and I am going to backtrack here and type 5 over 2. 5 over 2. And then I'm going to submit my answer, and there's my answer is correct. Okay, so that's how you do that first part. Okay, so now we're going to the next section called trig equation from a graph. So now in this section, you're going to do what we did in the last one, okay? There's nothing different that's going to change. The only difference is that I'm giving you a graph and you have to pull the information from the graph. So you yourself have to pull the amplitude and the midline and the frequency and the period. You have to pull that information on your own without being given the information. So I'm going to take a screenshot here of this problem here. And we're going to go to the whiteboard first so that we can practice identifying what, let me copy here, what all the information is. And then I will come back to show you how to enter that. So let's paste here and see if this works out. There we go. Okay, so here is our graph. Let's make it really big. And remember, let me write down, I think we needed the amplitude, that's your A value. We need the frequency, that's your B value. And we need A, B, C. We're not doing C. We need our D value, our midline, right? And period needs to be given to us to be able to find B, right? Okay, so I always tell students that you should always, when graphing, when looking for information from a graph, always start with your midline. That's always the easiest thing to look for. So what you're looking to do is you're looking to see where would this graph, if I drew a horizontal line, where would it divvy up this graph into two sections evenly split, okay? So one way to eyeball it is we see that the highest value, y value of our graph is going to be a 4. The lowest y value of our graph is going to be a -2. So if we look up and down this x-axis, right? I mean, not the x-axis, the y-axis, we notice that there are a total of 6 squares, right? So if I were to split that up, it would divvy up into 3. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So I'm going to either count from down up here and count down 3 squares, 1, 2, 3, and draw the line there, or I can start from the bottom and count up 3. 1, 2, 3. Either way, notice your midline ends up being at y equals 1. So I'm going to use the color orange, and I'm going to draw that midline here just to give you a visual. And that's our midline. And it occurs at y equals 1. Okay? So then why do I suggest that you do midline? Because if you know your midline, you will be easily able to find your amplitude, because amplitude will always be the distance from the max to the midline, or from the midline to the max. And notice that there's a total of 3 squares, top and bottom, from the midline. So that's my amplitude. Amplitude is the distance from the midline to the max or the min. Okay. All right. Now, I'll erase this for a second and erase this for a second. Now, we need to find the period. Actually, I'm going to erase this as well. The period is the length of one cycle. All right. And I take it back. I'm going to put this back. The length of one cycle. So notice our midline right here at y equals 1 cuts our graph in half, and you're going to use the midline and the y-axis to determine whether or not your graph is a sine or a cosine. So my midline is right here, and my graph begins right here on the y-axis above. Notice it's above the midline. And when your graph begins above the midline and continues from that spot to complete one cycle, you have to stop at the same value you started at. That is the shape of a cosine graph. Whenever it is above the graph, above the midline, you are going to categorize that as a cosine graph. Okay, so you are going to now determine the length of this graph. Let me excuse my daughter who's singing in the background. So you are going to go from left to right on this graph. So if you start from here and you go all the way to this way, the length of that graph horizontally is 2 pi over 3, because it starts at 0 and it ends at 2 pi over 3. So my period is 2 pi over 3. Okay? So you are going to take that information and find B. So here we go. So the formula is period equals 2 pi over B. And my period, which is this, is going to replace the period here. Okay? So 2 pi over 3 equals to 2 pi over B. Do exactly like we did in the last one. You will cross multiply in both directions and set up your equation. So the first oval that I did was 2 pi times B, and 3 times 2 pi is 6 pi. Again, we're trying to solve for B because that's our frequency, so I'm trying to isolate that. So I need to divide by anything that is accompanying the B, because I want B by itself, and so I want to get rid of that highlighted value. So I'm going to divide both sides by what I'm trying to get rid of. So whatever I do on one side, I've got to do on the other. So now this cancels, and I get 6 divided by 2 is 3, and these pi's cancel. So there is my B value. It's a 3. So now I know my amplitude is a 3, my midline is a 1, and my B is a 3. So I'm going to take that information, go back over here, and I want you to notice that the instructions here says write an equation, okay? So make sure you do type y equals, okay? Let me do this. So we're going to type y equals, and then the amp value, what was the amp value? I forgot already, a 3. So amp value was a 3. Okay, 3. And then we know it was cosine. And we're going to type x for now, and we'll come back. No, actually, we already found out what b was. B was 3 as well. And so I'm going to go back here and type 3. Barely can see what it is. I think x. We're just going to go with it and see if I did it right. And then the value was a 1, so plus 1. Let's see if it typed out right. Okay, so 3 equals 3 cosine 3x plus 1. Let me make sure. 3 is your A, B is your 3, and D is your 1. And so let's see if you submit. And we got it correct. Okay, so pull that information out from your graph. Okay, so the next thing, let's see what I can get here. Let's find another problem. Okay, so here we have now a problem where we need to do some graphing. So the first thing you're going to do is in this little box over here on the far left, the Y scale, I want you to always type a 1, okay? Just always type a 1 for now. And if you start noticing that the points that you are trying to graph don't fit on the graph, change that 1 to 2. But usually the 1 scale on the y-axis fits pretty much for everything. Here in the x-axis label, you have to calculate the length of your period, the length of your period. So notice our problem is y equals 7 times cosine 4x, okay? So let's go back to our whiteboard here. I'm going to write that down. It's y equals, oh goodness, I have the worst memory. What was it? 7 cosine 4x. 7 cosine 4x. So for the x-axis, I need you to put in that box the period length of your curve, of your cosine curve in this case, okay? So again, we use that formula, period equals 2 pi over b. And I am looking for period, okay? This is what I'm looking for, period. So I'm going to take my 2 pi, and I need to divide it by whatever my b value is. So 2 pi divided by my b. Now remember, my b value is always the number that is directly in front of the x, okay? My b value is always the number directly in front of my x. So in this case, my b value I'm going to substitute is a 4, and 2/4 reduces to 1 over 2 pi. Okay, or if you want to write it as pi over 2, that is fine as well. So I'm going to come back to my graph, and I'm going to type pi over 2. And I'm going to hit enter, or done, sorry. Set the x and y axis labels and hit done. When you are done, I need you to take this green button, and I want you to come here to the beginning and count out 8 squares out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Count 8 squares out. Either 8 or 12. I usually do 8, okay? And what you're telling me, or telling the computer program here to do, is that you're going to plot the graph between 0 and pi over 2. That's where the first cycle is going to be plotted. Because notice that they're asking you just to plot 5 points for one cycle, all right? And it has to be between 0 and pi over 2. Now, what is our midline? Our midline is 0. So if you look at y equals 7 cosine 4x, there's no d value. There's no plus number. So there is a midline at 0. Since we're doing cosine, we are going to start with our first point above the midline axis. So I'm going to go to my midline, which is right here at 0, 0, and I am going to go up 7, and I'm going to put my first point. And because it's cosine, I know it has to end at the same height at the period length. Notice I'm not going to put it over here or something like that because it doesn't exist. My point has to end right where I said my period is going to end. Okay, so the first two dots go at the beginning and end of your period at the positive amp value. And then I want you to find the middle of your 8 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you are going to go down from the midline, whatever your amplitude value was. So in this case, have to go down 7. The last 2 points are always going to be on the midline for cosine, okay? And so if I have 8 squares and then I split it in 4 to get the middle, to split the 4 again, it will be 2. And then from 4 to 8 squares is going to be 6. So I'm going to plot it right there. And there are your 5 points. And just do that pattern every single time for cosine, no matter where you graph it. As long as the midline cuts that cosine graph in half, you know it's a cosine graph. Okay? So I'm going to hit submit. I'm going to try another one with you. Okay. Let me see if this graph, great. This is a sine graph. So let's do this one together. So again, you'll start here, typing the 1. And then here, we need to calculate your period. Okay, so 4 sine 2x. I'm going to come over here. 4 sine of 2x. So I need to find the period to do that x-axis thing. So it's going to be 2 pi over whatever my b value is. Well, my b value is the number in front of x. So in this case, it's a 2. And 2 pi divided by 2 is just going to be 1 pi. So I'm going to take this answer and put it in my x. There's pi. Now I'm going to click done. And once you click done, go 8 squares out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I have to draw 5 points in between those two, in between 0 and pi. Now again, my midline is 0. Okay, so I am going to plot 5 points. My family is so noisy. I'm so sorry. I need to plot 5 points. This is a sine graph. So a sine graph has its first 3 points on the midline, not at the amp values like cosine. So you do 1 here at the beginning and the end, just like cosine, except cosine, I'm going to show you here, cosine we did, let's say this amp value is 4, you would have done it here and here, right? But it's a sine. So I do here and here on the midline, and then the middle, okay? And then my amplitude is a positive 4. So in between those first 4 squares, I start here and I go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And between the last 4 squares, I go in the middle and I go down 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there you go. There is your, sine graph. And you're done. And let's submit. And there you go. Pretty easy, right? Okay, here's one more problem. Here's a graph, y equals -4 sine 3x plus 5. I'm going to put the 1 right there. And then here we have to calculate the period. And so look at our b value. Our b value is a 3. So I'm going to do 2 pi over my b value. And so it's just going to be 2 pi over 3. So I'm going to do 2 pi and then over 3. And it's just going to be that because 2/3 can't reduce or anything like that. Then let me make this a little bigger. I'm going to scoot this over 8 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And notice now our D value, our midline, is no longer 0. Here this time my midline is a 5. Okay, so what I need you to know is that the 5 line, midline, is what you are going to focus on. You're no longer focusing on the dark x-axis, but imagine a line being drawn right through the 5, okay? And I wish we could, it's along this line, okay? I'm trying to get you to visualize that line. That's not the answer, of course. So let me tell them, no, do not accept that. Let me unclick those, but that's where I want you to focus, okay? That's the new midline. So let me do that. Okay, so I need to graph a sine graph, okay? Sine graph means the first 3 dots are on the midline. So I'm going to do one at the beginning and one at the end and right in the middle, okay? So one at the 0, then the last part at the 8, and then at the 4, because we have 8 squares, right? Now, sine graph says we have 2 more dots where they're going to go make the wave, to help make the wave. But notice that I have a negative. So that means instead of going to the middle in the first 4 blocks and going up 4, I need to go down 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, because my graph reflected. And the second middle 4, I'm going to go up 4 units for my amp. So notice it's a turned around graph. And I'm done. There is your graph, and we got it correct. So my friends, I hope that helps you understand this section. The other sections are kind of like just being able to read the graph and match the multiple choice. So it's pretty straightforward. Look for your midline here, which you can tell is going to be 200. Right? So if you picture that 200 line, you're going to notice that the first point started above 200, negative 200 at 300. And so we know for sure it's going to be a cosine graph. So it has to be either the second or the last one. And then you have to find your B value between the second and the last one. So you are going to have to find the period, which in this case is going to be, what would this be, 80, right? Because it goes down and then up. And find the period, 80, and set it equal to 2 pi over b and solve. And that way it will eliminate and you will be able to choose which one it is. I'm trying to see if I can do this one in my head. I believe it'll be pi over 40, if I'm not mistaken. And yep, just select your answer. You might need to do a little bit of math. And that's it. Okay, work your way through these problems. Thanks for watching.